Welcome to the Treasury Update podcast, presented by Strategic Treasurer, your source for interesting Treasury news, analysis, and insights in your car, at the gym, or wherever you decide to tune in.
Welcome to the Treasury Update podcast. This is Craig Jeffery, and our episode today is The Future of Payments, Navigating Change Management. And I'm here with Susan Nichols from Deluxe. Susan, welcome to the Treasury Update podcast.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
You know, the idea of navigating change management seems to fall in favor and out of favor depending on who you're talking to. But, in the context of, making changes to payments, it seems so vital both internally and externally. I wanted to get your thoughts and then maybe add some of my own about what's needed for successful change management within an organization, particularly as it relates to payments or moving digital with payments. And I was wondering if you could start us off on the internal side of the company. What's necessary, what's needed to make change management successful?
Yeah, well, I think with any change, right, whether it's part of moving to digital within an organization or not, change really has to start at the top. Change typically needs to be sponsored and continue to be sponsored throughout the course of the change, and make sure that there's clarity on the vision, right? Why are we changing? People want to understand the why. And as it relates to just going digital and specifically with payments, it's all about not only helping ensure that the organization is ready for that change through training and resources and a formal change management program, but also ensuring that we have the external lens that our clients, that our vendors, that our other stakeholders, including regulatory bodies potentially, right, that they're ready for the change and they understand where we are going. Buy-in is absolutely critical. And at this stage of where we are in our business, normalizing change as a way to continue to grow is paramount.
I think that makes a lot of sense. There certainly can be resistance, and it's easier to see resistance if there's a lack of understanding of what's being done, what's the end goal. One of those famous quotes is if it isn't broke, don't fix it. And then other people have that quote, if it's you need to break it, whatever the quote is. And so your comments there on the internal side, what has to be done on the company. There's an external side too. Some of those have to deal with the vendor. How do you work with a vendor who's helping you make change? Some of the things that we've seen most helpful, I'd love to hear any feedback you have, as well as communicate clearly. And this is more than just having a weekly cadence of checking on the project management side, but communicating clearly about what's working, what's not, thinking through things ahead. The vendor has done these things many, many times, but they haven't done it at this company. And the company knows their internal culture, but they may not have done this particular project. And so that communication is essential to bring both people up to speed in that, communicating clearly about redirection, change in scope, how to make sure things are going well seems to be another key area. Any additional thoughts on the change management with the vendor?
I think it's just, you've got to bring all the folks that are potentially going to be part of the change or affected by change kind of into the fold early. What you want to prevent is disruption, or what is perceived as disruption, right? Because generally change is positive, especially in the context of business. And if things are perceived as disruption, right, it's perceived by vendors or individuals in the company as really challenging the norm, challenging what's comfortable for them. So if you bring them in early and you're able to articulate the value of the change that they're going to assist in helping you transform and go through, then you're going to have a lot more camaraderie, a lot more support, and a lot more understanding, right, as you really work to change processes, which is really what you're changing with a vendor, right? It's typically going to be around the process side versus, maybe a people and potentially a technology change as well, but more process driven.
The other area of change management, or the other party in change management, is oftentimes the customers, right? You mentioned some aspects of that too. And if we're moving to digital, how do you pay our company? How do we pay you? Why is there value moving digital from an information standpoint, efficiency standpoint? Those factors matter and have to be communicated, just like on the internal side. Here's what we're doing. Here's where we're moving. Maybe it's we're only paying digitally. We're only receiving digitally, or it's here's one option, here's why this may be superior. That communication needs to take place early on, or you don't get the adoption you're looking for, either on the inbound side or the outbound side, and therefore it reduces or discounts what your cost benefit analysis may have been.
Right. With customers, I mean, it's the change is actually changing behaviors, right? We are all creatures of habit. So I think that's pretty difficult at times for people to really change behaviors. So outside of just communication and really putting the value proposition of the change through the lens of the customer, you may even have to consider incentives when you get into your kind of customer base and helping them kind of enabling them to go through that change. So that's sort of a unique aspect when you think about the customer base. But at the end of the day, right, the change, especially going digital, you're going to get a lot of value on the back end, right? You get the ability to do automated, hopefully onboarding to ease that, ease the ability to board new customers and to take advantage of a product that a customer might want to start using. You're going to get, more streamlined billing. You're going to get more information, access to data and reporting, hopefully that that you probably haven't gotten in the past. And that is the kind of change that's happening today, right? It's not just change for change's sake. It's change to improve processes. It's change to reduce the manual aspects of many things we do today. It's change to make us better and faster and stronger, honestly, and to deliver a better client experience. So I think if people can just realize that that is the catalyst for most change, especially for customers, that they might have more tolerance of going through the change pain that tends to come with, just changing behaviors.
I liked how you were saying that. It made me think about how do you understand how impactful a change will be? And there is that natural resistance to it. Like, why make a change? There's pain in making any change. There's some effort. Is it going to be worth it? And sometimes it's almost impossible to see what that benefit is up front. And I'll give a silly example. I remember the first car I got that had Bluetooth. I was like, this is ridiculous. This is not necessary. This is excessive. Nobody needs this. And then I punched it into my phone and I did a call on the drive home, and I was completely convinced before, if they hadn't bundled it with the car at that time, I would have thought that was kind of nonsense. But now it's like, if you wouldn't look at a car that wouldn't have that. And sometimes that's the way with better information, better data that works in the process. But we can't always see that up front. Change management is one element of making changes for the future of payments or any type of, move to digitalization with payments. And the either or questions are sometimes difficult because it's a bit forced. But how important is change management compared to the technology changes?
Yeah, that's an interesting one to me because it's really hard to decouple those things, right? Technology changes typically do transform a business. So there's going to be some kind of downstream change that people are going to feel, right, when there is a technology change, whether it's the how they do something or, the way they interact with, whether it's a customer or other stakeholder. To me, they kind of go hand in hand. Technology changes are really part of what I consider kind of true organizational change management. But there's also the people side. So when you think about change management, that's why I believe you really need robust programs to ensure that the change that's happening from a technology perspective or more broadly gets completed, but even more is protected. Because people are, again, going to go back to what's comfortable. And so you really have to continue to help them understand through their lens, right, why they want to do something the new way. And I think with B2B, right, in our world, not just thinking about like consumers, but in the B2B space, it's not necessarily the what, right? I think most people are comfortable with what people want to change or, why. It's always the how. And so I think that just goes back to making sure that people are brought in early so they can help influence kind of how things change and give some insight to those that are driving the change so that they don't stumble along the way, right? And they get better buy-in and success.
How do you do that in the context of without disrupting anything? And maybe that's the wrong question too, because any change is going to have some disruption. If you say it's going to be perfectly seamless, I think people know that it's like, rarely is it perfectly seamless. There's lots of moving parts. So maybe you could comment about that, about how can you make change management work it into the process maybe not without disrupting anything, but without disrupting as much. There's people that are the naysayers at the front end, and that can be just resistance for the sake of resistance. But other times, those are people that are really good at identifying, here are all the impacts that will cause a problem. And if you can get them to identify everything, you've got your whole list of things that need to change from a communication standpoint and or a system standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, right, like there is no change that doesn't have some level of disruption. So I think, quickly addressing the fact that there will be impacts, I won't use the word disruption, but call it impacts to individuals or the way they do things is important. You don't want to lose credibility and show that you're out of touch, right, by believing that there won't be any kind of disruption. But in terms of how you do it, I think you got to really start with fostering a culture that supports change. Normalizing change is a really important aspect, I think, of business going forward. Change has always been sort of this thing that gets done within a certain period of time, and a program runs from this date to that date and we're done. But at this point, with the speed of just disruption and product management and the way that we are just continuing to just kind of speed up, honestly, we have to just constantly be changing. It's a normal part of business today. And so I think normalizing the change is really, really important. I think it's also really critical for companies to know that this will feel like a second job for most people. And so where you can to limit disruption, I would say it's very important for companies to invest in both a formal change management person or team that can help, again, kind of be an enabler of change, right? And be the guardian of that change even after the fact, but also in professional services that can really come in and augment the team. So you can look at your partners, like a Deluxe, right? And say, what other resources can they offer me? Can they give me just staff augmentation? Can they bring in some trained SMEs or subject matter experts, right? That can help me look at my specific environment and my set of circumstances and navigate that change. So I think there's a lot that can be done. And oftentimes people just sort of say, here's where we're going and let's do it, without really augmenting the team to be successful.
That's oftentimes under-resourced. Change management, communication plan, bringing people along, really, really good points. I'd love to hear a little bit about your background and your current role at Deluxe.
Yeah. So at Deluxe today, I am actually leading our receivables processing products. So all of our payments processing products that are within the B2B organization. So that includes specifically product management, solution consulting, as well as our go-to-market and business management functions. So it's a pretty broad scope. The products that sort of fall in the space are those that support, processing paper. So paper checks like Lockbox and RDC, as well as some of our digital payments products like eBill and eLockbox. So we have a number of products sort of that fall under my purview.
Digital and paper. I think my initial thought of Deluxe not too many years ago, less than a decade ago, is they're the check people. It's really surprising what a digital payments company and information company Deluxe has become with this long history of growing. So that was surprising to me, even as someone in the industry. You mentioned earlier on the podcast, Susan, about getting that high level buy-in from your C-suite. Not just setting the tone, but having a commitment to do that. How can an organization, someone embarking on a payments transformation or digitization program, how can they get that type of buy-in?
Yeah, I mean, people talk about bringing those along in the journey, right? And I think that applies to the C-suite, to your executive level team as well. But I would start by being sure that you can clearly articulate sort of the problem to be solved, right? And specifically, think about the business case for change. Companies want to be stewards of capital. And so it's important they understand, why are we changing? Because with all change, again, there's typically a couple different components. There's a technology change that is likely, as well as potentially people and process changes. So it's important to ensure that they are very clear on what issue is being solved by undergoing a change. And then I would recommend really bringing them along in the sense that, presenting them with alternatives, helping them be part of the decision-making process on how we're going to change, because then they're bought in, right? Once they have been part of that decision process and they understand, they're able to sponsor the change. They can help you navigate roadblocks and things that might arise throughout the course of the change effort. They can also help invest in ways to isolate the complexity. Back to the comment about managing disruption. Maybe that's bringing in some outside help, right, to really isolate that complexity and that disruption. So it's very important to make them part of the initial change decision-making process, in my opinion, and then obviously ensure that they're lockstep with you on how you are accomplishing that change and how that change is going throughout the process.
Extending on that, how much of that is removing roadblocks or impediments or resistance in different ways?
I think a good bit of that. At the end of the day, our executive teams at our businesses have the ability to make decisions that allow for, roadblocks to get moved, to reprioritize things, to tell somebody that does something a certain way every single day, right, that they want it done this way, or to help them say, stop doing what you're doing for this period of time and start doing this so that we can accomplish a change. It's important to have that level involved just to help drive that change throughout the organization. And more importantly, going back to the vision of the change. Why are we doing this? You're going to, reminding people, whether it's an external party or an internal party, on why the change is happening is so important, and continuing to put it into the lens that, can be received by that individual is also important. It's going to feel different for everyone. And so leaders who can bring a sense of empathy to a situation, drive that change, help them prioritize what's on their plate to support it, are going to be the ones that are successful. And hopefully your leadership team can do that.
Susan, the next area I wanted to talk about and hear your thoughts on was the importance of digital payments and taking manual steps out of the equation. And I always think, what causes inefficiency? Well, it's manual processes and poorly designed processes. Those create defects. Defects are extremely inefficient. And so one of the key areas is having a good process. The other is taking those manual steps out of the equation. That's where errors are introduced, where defects come into play. I know you have some stories about this and you have some examples, but I'd love to hear some real-world examples about this.
Yes. I mean, I think there's kind of two aspects to this, right? There is both kind of the digital product aspect of this that our customers can, use, but there's also the digital experience, right? And there's a digital experience that both our external partners or vendors are experiencing, as well as our internal employees. So I think, it's critically important to try to take the manual steps out to prevent issues, but we have to just make sure that we sort of baby step folks, depending on where they are and what the current process looks like. Not everyone is ready to leap, straight to the end state. So just helping educate and train along the way is really important. Within our space, we have we had an issue this year where we were able to actually go and read a bunch of contracts in a different way. And what that means is we were able to leverage AI in a digital process where instead of having a tiger team of numerous folks, manually pulling contracts, reading them, right, we were actually able to use technology and digitization to digitize information out of those contracts, capture it, summarize it, and ultimately tell us what we needed to know in a fraction of the time, if you can imagine. That allowed a bunch of people to continue to do the job that we need them to do every day in supporting our clients. And so, that's just one example internally. And then you have products, right, that our customers can use to help, ensure that they get straight through processing in a more, in a faster way. So as a legacy check company, right, we're very, very proud to manufacture and process paper checks. No doubt. But we have also developed digital solutions for our clients so that they can, get easy access to information, have straight through processing, receive their deposits faster, automate activities that take a lot of time, right? Like matching an invoice, to a payment and applying cash. Those are all things that we are looking and very focused on making sure they're automated and digitized so that people can focus their time elsewhere. But it's a lot of change, right? So we have to make sure, again, that we employ the right change management techniques, that we go at a pace where adoption can occur, and really enable all of our clients to be comfortable and for us, successful.
As we wrap up, I wanted to start a little bit of a discussion about leading practices for implementation. What do you need to look for or be aware of? And you brought up a bunch of those. What are leading practices for implementation? That there's senior leadership buy-in, that the C-suite explains what's being done, why it's being done. And this is always in the context of a lot of priorities. So the end is in goal. It's clear. I think the two other things that seem to be clear is that there's a very formal project management process and a formal change management process. This ability to communicate throughout the process, to understand how change impacts the customer community, internal participants, particularly, through implementation, through the white glove service or the ramp up time, and then post. Those things seem to be key areas for implementation, having that defined, making sure people have the resources they need for project management, for IT, for change management. Those all seem to be essential leading practices for implementation. Any comments on those, or anything else stands out as something we don't want to miss or forget?
Yeah, I think you summarized that really well. The one that I think I would just sort of double down on and make sure is really understood is you really need to spend time identifying the uncertainty that surrounds the change, that's challenging someone's kind of comfort level, that's challenging, a process that somebody, whether it's, again, internal or external, has been doing for many years a certain way, and start talking about it, right? Talk about it proactively, get their input so that you can execute the change in a way that they feel sort of bought in. I think in addition, you need to really understand your company's tolerance for change. Every company is unique, depending on what change has already occurred, depending on the type of business you are. Every company is going to have a different appetite or tolerance for that change. So that's an important thing to be aware of as you embark on a large change or transformation project. And then lastly, the one thing I did not talk about as a leading practice is whether you have a formal project or program or not, whoever is driving the change, whoever is sponsoring the change, and the folks that are enabling that change must be willing to iterate and evolve and take feedback and speed up here and slow down there and really just try to manage that disruption as much as possible. If you're not willing to listen, then it's going to be, again, very, very hard for whatever change that you spend time and money implementing to be adopted and protected and continue to be sustainable over the course of the next year. So I would say really that iteration process and feedback process is very important.
That's great. That the iteration process requires that adaptability or flexibility. That seems so crucial. No plan survives without some change. Susan, thank you so much. Really appreciate your input.
Yeah, you're welcome. I think we should just remember, right, that in any business, change is normally good. It can be very uncomfortable based on what you know or what you don't, but it's being in the dark that makes people feel like it's a disruptive change. So it's best to manage that change in a way that makes it feel productive instead.
You've reached the end of another episode of the Treasury Update podcast. Be sure to follow Strategic Treasurer on LinkedIn. Just search for Strategic Treasurer. This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.